Because of why I search the deep through endless nights, no time to sleep. The call inside I can't deny. I'll find the light because of why.
For a good long while, the Spanish Empire was the global superpower. I mean, we're talking about an empire where the sun literally never set. But what happened? How did it all fall apart? Well, that's what we're going to dig into today. Okay, so to really get why the fall was so dramatic, you've got to understand just how high they climbed. And, one user on Reddit put it perfectly. If you looked at Spain back in its heyday, say the 1600s, they looked completely unbeatable. They had these massive territories all over the Americas, their armies were the most feared on the planet, and these treasure fleets were just hauling mountains of silver and gold back home. They were, no joke, the center of the world. So that's the big question, right? How did the world's very first global superpower fall, and fall so hard? I mean, how does an empire with all that cash and all that power just fizzle out? Well, as we're about to see, this wasn't some single dramatic event. Oh no, this was more like a slow-motion collapse that was centuries in the making. All right, first things first, the root of Spain's decline, and this is super important, wasn't a lack of money or military might. Nope, the problem was way deeper. It was a fundamental flaw in its whole reason for being. You could say the empire had a mission, a really powerful one, but it didn't really have a smart strategy. And to get what I mean by that, let's just quickly talk about what grand strategy is. Think of it like a country's master plan. It's the big picture thinking that connects what a nation wants most, things like being secure and prosperous, to what it actually does day to day, whether that's through diplomacy, trade, or even going to war. And this comparison here just shows the problem so clearly. On one side, you've got what a normal, healthy strategy looks like, right? A country's actions are all about serving its own national interests. But then you look at the other side, the Habsburg way of doing things in Spain, and it's all warped. It's distorted by this one single, all-consuming idea, religious ideology. And that often meant that Spain's own best interests got pushed to the back burner. And what was that mission? It was super simple and super powerful. Spain saw itself as the defender of the Catholic faith, the sword and shield of the church. Seriously, everything else was secondary. Every political decision, every war they fought, every penny they spent, it was all seen through this lens. The goal wasn't just to make Spain strong for its own sake, it was to defend Catholicism from all threats, whether it was the Ottoman Empire in the south or the new Protestant ideas popping up in the north. So what happens when your entire foreign policy is driven by ideology instead of practicality? Well, you get dragged into a whole lot of trouble. For Spain, it meant getting stuck in a series of endless, exhausting, multi-front wars that, frankly, it just couldn't afford. I mean, just look at this timeline. It's absolutely relentless. At the same time they were fighting this brutal 80-year-long war to crush the Protestant revolt in the Netherlands, they were also fighting the Ottoman Empire for control of the sea, and fighting a huge war with their rival France. And on top of all that, they were trying to stamp out rebellions inside their own borders in Portugal and Catalonia. It's insane. They were literally fighting everyone, everywhere, all at once. You can see just how incredibly stretched thin they were. They had to defend land in Italy, hold down a string of forts in North Africa to deal with pirates, protect their own massive coastline, and try to project power all across the rest of Europe. It was a complete strategic nightmare. And this is where we get to the great paradox of the Spanish Empire. Here they are, the richest nation on earth, literally swimming in silver from the New World, and yet the government went bankrupt. Over and over again. The cost of fighting these endless religious wars was just so mind-bogglingly huge that not even the legendary silver mines of Potosí could pay the bills. Okay, that brings us to the second huge piece of the puzzle. While the Spanish military was being bled dry all over Europe, the economy back home was basically a hollow shell. It was an empire built on a mountain of silver, not on a solid economic foundation. And again, this comment from Reddit just hits the nail on the head. Because they were getting all this gold and silver from the Americas, they just didn't really bother building up their own industries. Why would you when you have what feels like an infinite cheat code for money? But this is a classic example of what economists now call the resource curse. So let's walk through this totally broken economic cycle. Step 1, you mine incredible amounts of silver in the Americas. Step 2, You ship it all the way across the Atlantic back to Spain. But here's the crazy part, step 3, that silver barely even gets unpacked before it's immediately sent out again to pay off foreign bankers, mostly in Germany and Italy, who were funding all of Spain's wars. Which meant that the most important step, step 4, just never happened. There was hardly any money left to invest in Spanish farms or workshops or local businesses. The wealth literally passed through Spain. It didn't stay there. And this just completely hollowed out the country from the inside. Think about it. Early on, they expelled their most skilled Jewish and Muslim artisans and merchants, a huge blow to their economy. Then all the ambitious get-up-and-go types were leaving for the New World to try and make a fortune. On top of that, you had this culture where actual hard work was seen as something for the poor, not for gentlemen. The whole economy became weirdly focused on just herding sheep for wool instead of, growing a diverse range of crops. And the final nail in the coffin? The tax system was a disaster, crushing the very people, the peasants and the middle class, who were least able to afford it. So let's recap. You've got this rigid, overextended empire fighting wars everywhere, with an economy that's been hollowed out from the inside. Spain was like a giant, but a giant that was already weak and teetering. All it needed was one good final push to knock it right over. And that final push, it came from one man, Napoleon. The absolute chaos of the Napoleonic Wars in the early 1800s was the knockout blow that the already weakened Spanish Empire just could not survive. You can see how fast it all unraveled right here. First, Spain gets bullied into an alliance with France. That leads directly to the Battle of Trafalgar, where the British Navy just obliterates the combined French and Spanish fleets. And that's a huge deal, because it completely cuts Spain off from its American empire. Then, to make things worse, Napoleon just decides to invade and occupy Spain itself. And with the mother country in total chaos, well, the colonies in the Americas see their chance. They revolt, they fight for their freedom, and they win. And just like that, the empire was basically gone. So after all that, what's the big takeaway from this incredible story of rise and fall? Well, it's really tempting to point to one single thing, but the truth, as always, is a lot more complicated. So let's bust a couple of big myths right now. First, this idea that Spain's fall was caused by one big defeat, like the famous Spanish Armada. The reality? This was a slow, systemic rot that took centuries. Second, the myth that the problem was just a lack of money. Nope, Spain had tons of money. The real problem was a rigid, unbending ideology that forced them to spend that money in the worst possible ways. So if there is one thing to remember, it's this. The very thing that made Spain so incredibly powerful, that unwavering commitment to its religious mission, was also its fatal flaw. It created an empire that was incredibly strong on the surface, but also rigid, overextended, and in the end, just too brittle to survive the pressures of a changing world. Hey, if you found this deep dive as interesting as I did, do us a huge favor and hit that like button. Make sure you're subscribed for more explainers like this, and hey, share it with a friend you think might dig it. And we'd love to leave you with one final question to chew on. Is an empire's defining ideology, the very thing that makes it great, always destined to become its own undoing in the end? Let us know what you think down in the comments. Thanks so much for joining us.